Hey everybody, I don't know why my audio doesn't work sometimes when I initially start the live stream, but hopefully now it's working. So whenever there's news about Hillary Clinton contemplating whether to make a late entry into the Democratic primary race, what I like to do is just imagine as though the theme from the Star Wars Imperial March is playing in the background. So bum 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 bum. That seems like the appropriate background music for this sort of batty idea that Hillary is going to make a dramatic entry into the race. Now, why has this picked up steam recently? Yes, you have the feud with Tulsi that seemed like this unprovoked attack by Hillary, where she's wading into the fray. But more significantly, there were two stories that came out yesterday in the Washington Post and the New York Times, which basically relayed the same exact thing, which is that Hillary is considering it. I mean, they're leaving open the possibility that there are circumstances in which Hillary would, in fact, get into the race if she felt like she could win. And when you have sort of this almost coordinated or this simultaneous publicity offensive by Hillary spokespeople or backers or others who are aligned with her, where they go to the Washington Post and the New York Times to say, hey, this is a possibility, that's most indicative of the fact that she at least is leaving open the possibility of running. Now, if she does run, that's a major triumph for a couple of people. First of all, Tulsi Gabbard, who in her tweet storm responding to Hillary's attack a few days ago, she explicitly challenged her to enter the race and stop going after Tulsi through proxies, or to make her argument against Tulsi overtly and do so by putting everything on the line and actually getting into the race formally. And that would be just epic if Tulsi actually succeeded in prodding Hillary Clinton into getting in the race. Now, I actually think it would be helpful in a way for Hillary to get in the race. Obviously, it'd be tedious and painful in all kinds of respects, but it would be healthy in this respect, which is that the Democratic Party has since 2016 been in denial about Hillary's complicity or responsibility for her epic failure to win the 2016 election. She had everything going in her favor. Huge financial advantage, huge advantage in terms of the media's preferences, huge just sort of institutional backing among all kinds of elite sections of American political life. And she still managed to lose to the guy from The Apprentice. And that's the way I put it, because we're so inoculated to the craziness of Trump being in office, go back and remember that he was a reality TV show host and a beauty pageant proprietor. That was his main credential or credentials. And Hillary still managed to lose to him. So the Democratic Party, for a variety of reasons, never really grappled with the fact that Hillary presided over this epic loss, and that owed to her own failures, whether it be her corruption, her deceit, her foreign policy record. So if all that now gets brought into the fore by way of Hillary entering the race officially, then you could actually see a robust debate about what Hillary's influence in the party really was. Remember, one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders got a huge platform in 2016 was because the entire party was too intimidated to actually run in the 2016 primaries, because Hillary was this quasi-incumbent figure who crowded out the entire field, except for Bernie, who was, at least early on, seen as a very marginal and unserious figure. And there aren't that many people in American history who accomplished that in terms of like dictating the direction of their own party and forcing them to just coalesce prematurely around their inevitable victory. And Hillary managed to do that. And the after effects of that are still present within the Democratic Party, which is why you have such a reticence on the part of Democratic partisans to really engage with the true implications of Hillary's legacy. And so they're taking out their anger on Tulsi, who is sort of ripping off the Band-Aid and using Hillary's attack to sort of force this long overdue debate about her influence in the party. So it wasn't as though Tulsi just went out of her way out of nowhere and threw a grenade. She responded to an attack. She was provoked, and she's using that now as a point, as an entry point into trying to foster this long overdue debate in the context of a Democratic primary race, which is perfectly warranted. A healthy party, you would think, should be able to honestly reckon with the political impact of its previous nominee and how that actually crippled the party in 2016. Remember, Hillary didn't just lose. She presided over a major defeat among Democrats across the country when everybody just assumed that Democrats were going to win the House in 2016, and they lost. And lots of people who had just been assumed that would win in Congress ended up losing. Some examples that come to mind are, Russ Feingold in Wisconsin, who was one of the few civil libertarian senators while he was in the Senate. He made a comeback and ran again in 2016. And he ended up losing because of Hillary's terrible coattails. Zephyr Teachout in upstate New York lost. She was also a highly regarded progressive reformer who ran against Andrew Cuomo in 2014. She ran for Congress in 2016 and lost largely because of Hillary's tainted coattails. And there are many, many other examples of that. So for a party who actually that actually wants to return to viability, and they are now, in fairness, to some extent, because they won the House in 2018, but they should be not just willing but eager to debate the legacy of Hillary Clinton, and do so in a harsh manner, given her overwhelmingly negative impact on the party writ large. So Tulsi had a hand in engendering that debate, and now you have whispers among Democratic donor types and operatives that, oh man, who's entitled to win the race, to get in this race other than Hillary? Because the notion that Hillary propagated immediately after the 2016 election, and it continues today, is that she didn't really quite lose the 2016 race. Rather, she was maliciously deprived of her rightful ascent to the presidency by a host of sinister actors, most prominently, of course, Russians, who dispatched their bot army and interfered in the 2016 election to prevent Hillary from taking power, which she was obviously cosmically entitled to. So that is exactly what Hillary's people tried to propagate literally within like 24 or 48 hours of the 2016 election. And she wants to now impose that same narrative in the 2020 election because it keeps her relevant. It keeps her as sort of like a party elder. And it even, if some faint possibility should arise, gives her an opening to enter the race. Now, do I think she's actually going to enter the race? No, I think it's pretty unlikely. Although it's funny that if you look at the betting markets, Hillary is ahead of like all but 4 or 5 candidates in the field in terms of her likelihood to become the eventual nominee. First of all, Biden is not quite as weak as a quote unquote front runner as he's depicted in the media and especially on Twitter. Like if you look at Twitter and how people on Twitter talk about Biden, it's as though he already lost. And that's a function of Biden really having almost zero prominent supporters on Twitter. I mean, there's nobody on social media, or at least on Twitter in particular, who is like a full-fledged, passionate Biden supporter. So if that's the prism through which you view the Democratic primary race, you might be under the illusion that Biden has no support, which is just not true. and you could confirm that by going out into the public and going to events and talking to people who maybe they don't have this like burning passionate desire to support Biden, but they are comfortable with him and they want him to be the nominee. So that's a actually existing sentiment out there. And for Hillary to get in the race now would be bizarre because you have somebody who is also like maybe a less formidable, but still somewhat formidable quasi-incumbent figure in Biden who would be sucking up the establishment support that Hillary would obviously draw on. And but if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, you should want nothing more than for Hillary to get in the race because it would diffuse the rest of the field, meaning it would Hillary would draw support from Warren, from Biden, from Pete, Harris, pretty much everybody but Bernie. Because if you look at polling, I mean, there's a poll from Iowa a couple weeks ago, and it kind of analyzed who supporters of Bernie and Hillary in 2016 now support. And Bernie was at 0% in Iowa in terms of voters who caucused for Hillary in 2016. So among voters who caucused for Hillary in 2016, Bernie got nobody, at least according to this one poll in Iowa. And then, Iowa's not the be all end all, but it is the first contest, and that's significant in terms of dictating the shape of the race. So if Hillary were to get in the race, it wouldn't disadvantage Bernie, really. In fact, it would bolster him because he would maintain his core of support, and the rest of the candidates would probably atrophy some support. So if you want to be a little bit of if you want to do some dirty tricks, and if you want to, tinker with the race in sort of an underhanded way, I would advise all Bernie supporters to go to the mat in pushing whatever narrative they can to goad Hillary into the race, because number one, it would just be amazing political theater, and number two, it could help Bernie. Now, obviously, can't predict the future, so we don't know 100% how that would actually pan out, but the data and a lot of indicators do seem to underscore how this would help Bernie should Hillary actually cross that threshold and enter the race. I doubt it'll happen. But even if she doesn't get into the race, the debate and the conversation that Tulsi is now trying to capitalize on is a warranted one, because Hillary's foreign policy legacy and her appearances of corruption and everything, all the other baggage that she brought into the 2016 campaign was a huge reason why she lost and why Donald Trump won. I mean, that should be so uncontroversial at this point that it will go without saying. But you have Democratic partisans and all these Clinton acolytes and minions denying it and making out Hillary to once again be the victim in this episode, even though it was Hillary who just on her own accord just started spitballing and accused Tulsi of being essentially an asset or an agent of a hostile foreign government. So given how corrosive Hillary's rhetoric is and how sleazy her tactics are in trying to sort of interject in the race from afar, whether or not she runs, it's entirely worthwhile to debate and dissect her legacy insofar as it still has an effect on this current race. Because a lot of voters think that Hillary rightfully had won the election and that Trump is illegitimate fundamentally because Russia manipulated the election in his favor, and that's why he's in office. So that mindset is going to have all kinds of like second and third order effects on the way that people process political news, on the way that they develop their preferences in terms of who they're going to vote for in this next election. And to get that now all out in the open and to really sift through it is a necessary precursor to a healthy debate within the Democratic Party, to the extent that the Democratic Party is even interested in having a healthy debate, which is arguable. So that's the Hillary update. I wouldn't get too worked up over her entering the race. Obviously, you can never rule anything out, but it's still a fairly remote possibility. Nonetheless, obviously, there are people in her camp who want everybody to be cognizant that the possibility does exist, and it's not greater than zero for sure. And that's why they run to the New York Times and the Washington Post to say that she's talking to people about it and she's considering it. These stories were part of sort of a theme where Democratic donors and elites and such are kind of congregating now and expressing their anxieties about the race because they don't think that Biden is strong enough to be the establishment standard bearer. They have worries about his, viability and his fundraising numbers, which were not so great this past quarter. And, they don't think that Warren can win. And of course, Bernie is just a non-starter for them. They don't even think about Bernie. If you look at these articles, it's as though Bernie almost doesn't exist. Like they would never even contemplate getting behind Bernie. It's an unthinkable prospect for them. So they need somebody who is, in their minds, competent and can be the sort of mainstream Democratic pick should Biden falter. But again, a poll just came out today from CNN, a national poll, which showed Biden like actually surging. I think it was at 34%, which is probably a bit of an outlier. I doubt 34% is an accurate reflection of Biden's national support, but at the very least, it shows that this narrative that what you see on Twitter or maybe YouTube that he's imploded or he has no shot is just wrong. I mean, Biden, if anything, is like silent majority type support within the context of the Democratic primary, and that people who support him are older. They're not engaging on social media. They're not fighting on Twitter and whatever. But they like Biden. They desperately want to defeat Trump. They view him as the most tested alternative to Trump. They like the fact that he generally beats Trump in every poll by a sizable margin. So they're going to back Biden, but they're not going to be vocal about it. They're not going to really get down deep into the weeds of the sort of internecine squabbles that any primary inevitably gives rise to. But nonetheless, you have these donor types meeting in Manhattan and such behind closed doors saying, oh my God, maybe Mike Bloomberg needs to get in. John Kerry reportedly has had thoughts of getting in. Eric Holder, Deval Patrick. So, most likely these people are just sounding off. And it's very unlikely that at this late stage they'll get in. But, bear in mind, Biden almost ran in 2016, and he didn't announce a formal decision until October of 2015, so around this time. So it's not unprecedented for a candidate to get in the race this late if there are certain circumstances which allow for it. Bill Clinton, people might know or not, didn't get into the 1992 race until October of 91. So we're just kind of passing. So within a month or so, we're probably going to be at a point where it's just no longer viable for anybody to get in, but we're still sort of on the cusp of that, where it's a small but still existing possibility. But Hillary, I think, just fundamentally is toying with this prospect because she wants to maintain some leverage over the race. She wants everybody to be aware of the narrative about how she was wrongly deprived of the presidency, and she wants everybody to carry that forward into 2020 and have that sort of dictate the contours of this current race. So that, I think, is the basic motive on her part, more so than any real possibility that she's going to get in, although, of course, you can't rule anything out. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I will speak to you later.